Welcome to the Horror Vault channel. We bring you the most unbelievable stories that will leave you wide-eyed wanting more. Subscribe now and hit the like button to join the fun. But remember, once you've signed up, there's no turning back.
Let me start by saying I've always really enjoyed road trips. Sometimes I take them just for fun, listening to music and getting lost. Usually, they last just over the weekend. I go with my dog Shadow and usually spend the night in a cheap motel, if it ends up being a trip that lasts multiple days. A few nights ago, I was taking another road trip. On my way back, I left later than I usually would. I started nodding off and realized I wouldn't make it to the next town, let alone my house. The road I was on was surrounded by a dense forest, so when I found clearing in the trees, I pulled off the highway and onto the dirt road. I was planning on sleeping in my car, but I honestly didn't know whether it was legal or not. So I continued driving through the trees until I couldn't see the road anymore. I let Shadow out to do his business and reclined my seat all the way back. When he returned to the car, I closed and locked the doors. To describe where I had parked, it was opposite a small cabin, but not directly in front of it. Surrounded by plenty of trees, I didn't feel like I was intruding on the owners in any way. Besides, from what I could see, it looked abandoned, so I wasn't even sure if anyone owned it. After a few minutes, I started drifting off. I must have been sleeping for at least a few hours when I woke up to Shadow softly growling under his breath. I sat there, listening intently, trying to discern what he was hearing. Just then, the sound of footsteps reached my ears, coming from outside the car. It was followed by a long, high-pitched scratching sound. Shadow started going crazy, barking non-stop. I turned on my headlights and saw a very tall, middle-aged man dragging what I thought was a key around the perimeter of my car. He moved with a deliberate and slow pace. I wasn't sure if he could see me, but it seemed like his gaze never left me the entire time. He had this malicious grin on his face. Filled with horror, I quickly adjusted my seat back to an upright position and started the car, ready to gun it. But he made his way to my front bumper. All other sides of my car were surrounded by trees. The only way out of there was through him. I yelled and blared the horn while Shadow continued to bark aggressively. That's when I saw that he was holding a butcher's knife. He began approaching my driver's side door, creating an opportunity for me. I took it and started driving back towards the highway. I drove home without stopping. When I got out to check the damage, my paintwork was completely ruined. I don't know if that man intended to teach me a lesson for parking on his property or if he even owned it. I don't know. I don't plan on ever sleeping in my car again, at least not in a remote area.
This happened in June of 2020, when the pandemic was at its peak. Like everyone else, I was spending a lot of time indoors. I was eager to get out, so I came up with the idea of going camping. 6 of us made plans to go. We discovered a beautiful spot by a lake on Google Maps, which was about a 5-hour drive away. Since we couldn't comfortably accommodate everyone and all our belongings in just one car, we decided to take 2 cars. In the first car, there were myself, my sister, my sister's friend Julia, and a guy named Jordan, whom Julia brought along. I wasn't sure if Jordan was her boyfriend or just a friend, but I didn't ask. The second car was occupied by my cousin and her husband, Josh. We packed up the cars and embarked on a long journey through the mountains around 3 a.m., aiming to reach our destination early that morning. The drive started off uneventful, but about 2 hours into it, Jordan began complaining about feeling sick. It was understandable considering the winding roads. I asked him if he wanted me to pull over, but he said not yet. Jordan was sitting in the back seat with Julia, and I kept stealing glances at him through the rearview mirror to check on his condition. The last thing I wanted was a mess of vomit all over my back seat. As I observed him, I noticed a sudden change in his behavior, and he appeared strangely suspicious. He had his hand in his backpack and there was a mischievous grin on his face. He started asking peculiar questions, such as whether my car doors were locked. I reassured him that they were, explaining that they automatically lock when the car is in drive, as is the case with most cars nowadays. My sister and I exchanged perplexed glances with each other. Eventually, Jordan informed me that he was going to vomit. I offered to pull over on the highway, but he insisted that I take a dirt road he claimed to know about. I immediately called my cousin in the car behind us to inform her of our change in plans. Jordan led us down a narrow dirt road, barely wide enough for our cars to pass through the trees. I repeatedly questioned him if this was the right way, but he insisted we continue. I exchanged concerned glances with my sister multiple times. Finally, Jordan instructed us to stop. He swiftly exited the car and vanished into the woods, disappearing from sight. We could only see what was illuminated by our headlights, leaving us in the dark. Minutes passed. 2, 3, 5, 10, without any sign of Jordan. Suddenly, 3 men emerged from the trees on our left. They wore masks resembling those from the Purge movies. It was dark, making it difficult to see clearly, but it seemed like they were armed. I honked the horn continuously and started driving forward to find a spot where we could turn around. My cousin in the car behind us did the same. As we were making our escape, I stole another glance at the men. They stood motionless, observing us. We drove approximately 100 feet when I noticed something on the road ahead. A spike strip. Acting swiftly, I got out of the car and threw it into the forest. I hopped back into the vehicle, glanced in the rearview mirror, and witnessed the men sprinting towards us. Minutes later, we managed to reach the highway, our hearts pounding with fear. I received a frantic call from my cousin, who demanded to know who those men were. I informed her that we had no idea, but that Jordan hadn't returned from the woods. Later, Julia revealed that she had received a text from him consisting of 2 words, "Fiu." I began interrogating Julia about her relationship with Jordan because, as I mentioned before, I wasn't aware if they were dating or merely friends. She disclosed that she had met him on Tinder a couple of weeks prior. We examined his profile and immediately noticed several alarming signs. It appeared that this guy had been attempting to lead us into the woods, possibly with malicious intentions. My sister severed ties with Julia shortly after this incident. We don't know if she ever had any further contact with Jordan, but for her well-being, I hope she didn't. Ultimately, we decided to cancel the entire trip.
When I was in high school, my buddies and I used to go to a cemetery. We would go ghost hunting at night and have fun. We lived near a small town in Vermont, so there wasn't much else to do. We would walk around, take pictures and videos, but we never captured anything out of the ordinary. If you haven't been to Vermont before, most of the roads are very long and winding. We lived deep in the middle of the woods, where there were no streetlights and houses were a mile or 2 apart from each other. The road to the cemetery itself was probably 20 to 25 miles of 2-lane road, with just a few old-looking run-down houses. The atmosphere was eerie enough without the cemetery. Anyway, my 2 friends and I went up there at about 2 in the morning. It took us a good 30 minutes to get there. We were about halfway there when a car came up behind us out of nowhere and started driving dangerously close to us, so close that I couldn't even see its headlights. We couldn't make out the car or anyone in it, but we slowed down, assuming it was a state trooper or something. They slowed down too, keeping almost exactly the same distance. I sped up again, but they kept the same distance. That's when they turned off their headlights. Now, mind you, there were no streetlights on this road. It was pitch black. I increased my speed to about 20 or 25, over the speed limit, and finally we started to gain some distance. At this point, we thought we had lost them when, about a minute later, their headlights came back on, and they were right behind us again. Then their headlights went out. After about 20 seconds, they came back on. and they were directly behind us again. They did this about 3 or 4 times. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just some idiot driver in a hurry. Finally, as we neared the exit for the cemetery, the car started to back off. We turned into the cemetery, parked, and got out to start walking around. We had been walking for maybe a minute when a set of headlights pulled up right behind our car and stopped. Now, mind you, it was no one else should have been out here. The 3 of us each ducked down behind a headstone and watched. 2 masked men got out of their vehicle, both holding some type of blunt object in their hands. My heart sank. If we had to run now, I didn't know how we would in the dark forest with the little light we had. I could feel my heart racing inside my chest as we all looked at each other with terrifying expression. 2 men walked up to our parked car and started looking inside the windows with flashlights. Then they began trying to break into the car by tampering with the driver's side door's lock. They regularly looked up and checked their surroundings. After a few minutes, they seemed to have given up and started banging on the door window, smashing it with 2 or 3 shots. One of the men got inside and tried to hotwire the car. The car wasn't the newest, but it was definitely possible to hotwire the thing. I sat there praying they wouldn't succeed. It must have been 20 minutes when they gave up. They took everything out of the car and put it in their car and drove off. Before getting out of our hiding spots, we called the police. When they arrived is when we finally revealed ourselves. We lost hundreds of dollars worth of camera gear that night. One of my buddies lost his camera, while the rest of us all lost things like tripods, camera lenses, and other gear. The cops took all of our statements and got photos of the car's broken window. One of the officers told us how common it actually is for people to get victimized and have their cars stolen by force on these empty highways during these hours.